There are hotels out there that guard secrets you should never learn for yourself. These temporary spaces, designed for transience and anonymity, sometimes become stages for encounters that leave permanent marks on those who pass through them. I'm going to share for such encounters today. Stories that transformed ordinary hotel stays into experiences that redefined how these narrators perceive safety, privacy, and the very nature of what might be hiding just out of sight. I traveled constantly for my job, living out of suitcases and growing accustomed to the generic landscapes of budget accommodations. A bed, a shower, that's all I needed. The familiar scent of industrial cleaner, the hum of a dated air conditioner, the stiff texture of polyester blend sheets. These were my constants. For years, I navigated this world without incident, never once feeling a flicker of unease that couldn't be chalked up to loneliness or travel fatigue. Danger was an abstract concept, something that happened elsewhere to other people. That complacency shattered completely during a mandatory training seminar in a forgotten little Pennsylvania town, a place that seemed to exist in a perpetual state of overcast twilight. The hotel I booked was a 3-story structure of faded brown brick, sandwiched between a closed-down diner and an auto parts store. The lobby was a time capsule, with wallpaper featuring a subtle geometric pattern that had yellowed at the seams. The carpet was a deep wine-red shag, worn down to the backing in a path from the door to the front desk, and it emitted a scent. Not just old, but forgotten, like a trunk opened after decades. It reminded me of my grandmother's attic, a mixture of dust, mothballs, and stillness. The woman at the front desk didn't look up from her crossword puzzle when I approached. Her greeting was a monotone recital of policy, and she slid a heavy, plastic keycard across the countertop without making eye contact. The elevator groaned its way up to the 3rd floor, and when the doors opened, I was met with a corridor of profound silence. It wasn't just quiet. It was hollow, as if the space had been vacuum sealed. My own footsteps on the garish floral carpet seemed like an intrusion. Every door I passed was identical, each with a small, brass number and a peephole that felt like a watching eye. My room 312 was a study in benign neglect. The furniture was that particular shade of dark wood laminate designed to hide scuffs. A queen-sized bed dominated the space, flanked by a single nightstand holding a digital clock with overly bright red numbers. A small desk and chair sat under the window, which offered a view of the parking lot and the neon sign of the parts store. A painting of a generic sailboat hung slightly crooked on the opposite wall. It was utterly ordinary, which was precisely what I wanted. I tossed my duffel bag onto the paisley bedspread, kicked off my shoes, and turned on the small television, flipping through static-tinged local news until I found a rerun of a sitcom. The familiar laugh track was a comfort. A hot shower washed away the grime of the road, the water pressure surprisingly strong. Wrapped in a thin towel, I settled into bed, the day's drive weighing heavy on my bones. Sleep came quickly, a deep and thoughtless plunge. I didn't wake slowly. I was ripped from unconsciousness, my heart already pounding before my mind could process why. The room was pitch black, the television off. I lay perfectly still, listening. There it was again, a soft, prolonged shhhhk sound, like something being dragged slowly across the carpeted floor just outside my door. My sleep-fogged brain supplied reasonable explanations. The ice machine at the end of the hall finally dispensing, the building settling, a cart being moved by a night cleaner. I rolled over, pulling the blanket tighter. But the sound came a 3rd time, and this time there was no mistaking its proximity. It wasn't down the hall. It was right there on the other side of my door, a deliberate, intimate scrape. A jolt of adrenaline cleared the last cobwebs from my mind. I fumbled for the lamp on the nightstand, my fingers clumsy. Harsh yellow light flooded the room, making me blink. My eyes went immediately to the thin sliver of space under the wooden door. And there, stark white against the dark carpet of my room, was a triangle of paper. Someone had slid it through from the hallway. For a long moment, I just stared at it, my breath caught in my throat. The hallway beyond was silent again. No retreating footsteps, no whisper of movement. Swallowing hard, I swung my legs out of bed. The floor was cold. I crossed the room slowly, my senses hyper-alert, and crouched down. The paper was a simple, lined notepad sheet, neatly folded into a small square. I picked it up, felt flimsy, innocent. Unfolding it revealed a single sentence, scrawled in a chaotic, jagged handwriting. The letters were uneven, slanting in different directions, as if written in a hurry or by a trembling hand. It read, "They can see you from inside the building." I read it 3 times, the words not quite computing. They can see you from inside the building. It wasn't a threat, not explicitly. It was a statement, a warning. But from whom? And who were they? Cold knot formed in my stomach. I hadn't heard a thing after the sliding stopped. Whoever had delivered this message was either standing motionless in the hall right now, or had vanished without a trace. My earlier sense of security evaporated, replaced by a primal, skin-crawling awareness of my own vulnerability. I was in a locked room, but the lock suddenly seemed laughably inadequate. I hurried to the door and slid the rusty chain lock into place, the metallic clack sounding far too feeble. I didn't return to bed. Instead, I sat upright against the headboard, pulling my knees to my chest, and kept the lamp blazing. The room's shadows, once harmless, now seemed to pool and shift in the corners. Every tiny sound, the faint tick of the cooling heating unit, the distant groan of plumbing, made me jump. Sleep was unthinkable. Time lost all meaning. I watched the red numbers on the clock change. 1:47, 1:53, 2:08. The silence stretched, becoming a palpable weight. I began to wonder if I had imagined the whole thing, if travel fatigue and an overactive mind had conjured the note. Maybe it had been there when I checked in? No, I would have seen it. Just as this thought offered a sliver of relief, the sound returned. Shhhhk. Softer this time, more insidious. My eyes snapped to the door. Another white square was emerging, inch by inch, pushed patiently from the other side. This one took an eternity to clear the threshold. I waited until it was fully in my room before moving. The second note was folded the same way. My hands were shaking as I opened it. The handwriting was the same, but worse. The lines shakier, the letters more desperate. It said, "I was in your room before you today. I like to watch people sleep here. It's quiet." The blood drained from my face. This wasn't a vague warning anymore. This was personal, invasive, and horrifyingly specific. The idea that a stranger had been in this space, touching the things I was now touching, possibly hiding where I was now sitting, while I lay vulnerable in sleep, it was a violation that bypassed logic and went straight to the gut. A wave of nausea washed over me. I leapt from the bed, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had checked the room when I arrived, a perfunctory glance, but now I conducted a frantic, thorough search. I dropped to my knees and lifted the drooping bed skirt, staring into the dusty darkness beneath. Empty. I yanked open the closet door. Inside were only a few bare wire hangers dangling from a rod. I marched into the bathroom and tore back the floral print shower curtain, half expecting a figure to be standing there. Nothing. The small room was undeniably empty, yet it no longer felt that way. Felt contaminated. Back in the main room, I stared at the phone on the nightstand. I should call the front desk, but it was past 2:30 in the morning. The image of the bored woman with her crossword puzzle flashed in my mind. What would I say? Someone is slipping me creepy notes? She'd likely dismiss me as a nuisance. And a new, more terrifying thought emerged. What if the person sending the notes was from the hotel? What if it was the night manager or a cleaner with a master key? Calling the front desk might alert them directly. Paranoia, cold and slick, coiled in my mind. I made a decision, whispering it to myself like a vow. If a third note comes, I am leaving. I am getting out of this room and this hotel immediately. I will not wait to see what comes next. I resumed my vigil on the bed, my back pressed firmly against the wall, granting myself a view of the entire room and the door. The minutes dragged. The initial spike of fear began to recede, replaced by a draining, heavy exhaustion. My eyelids grew heavy. The lamp's light seemed to soften. Maybe it was over. Maybe the prankster, if that's what it was, had gotten bored. I allowed myself a shallow breath, my muscles beginning to unclench. That's when the third note came. The sound was different this time. Not a quick slide, but a slow, deliberate, almost sensual scrape. It was the sound of someone who knew I was listening, who wanted me to hear every millimeter of paper moving across carpet. I watched, paralyzed, as the white corner appeared. Then slowly, so slowly, the entire folded square emerged into the light of my room. It sat there, an accusation. I forced myself to move, my legs feeling like wood. I picked up the final note. The paper felt colder than the others. I unfolded it. The message was shorter, just 7 words, but they turned the air in my lungs to ice. Don't look now. I am back inside. The words didn't just describe a threat. They created one. The room itself seemed to shrink, the walls closing in. I spun in a frantic circle, my eyes scanning every shadowy corner, the space behind the chair, the gap between the desk and the wall. My rational mind screamed that I had just checked everywhere, that it was impossible, but the primal part of my brain, the part that recognized pure danger, was in control. The feeling of another presence was so overwhelming it was physical. A pressure in the room, a chill that had nothing to do with the thermostat. Couldn't breathe. In that moment, thought ceased. There was only instinct. Escape. I grabbed my duffel bag, not bothering to zip it, spilling clothes onto the floor. I didn't care. I went to the door, my hand hovering over the chain lock. I paused, then pressed my eye to the peephole. The fisheye lens distorted the empty hallway, stretching the patterned carpet and the identical doors into a surreal tunnel. Nothing moved. With a fumbling grip, I slid the chain free, turned the deadbolt, and yanked the door open. I didn't look back into the room. I burst into the hallway and sprinted toward the glowing green exit sign at the far end, my bag banging against my leg. The silence was broken only by the frantic slap of my bare feet on the carpet and my ragged breathing. At the stairwell door, I hesitated, a primal urge making me glance back down the long corridor I had just fled. At the very far end, near where my room was, I saw it, or I think I did. A dark shape, man-sized but indistinct, pulling back swiftly around the corner where the hallway turned. It was a glimpse, less than a second, but the impression of movement was absolute. I didn't wait for confirmation. I shoved through the stairwell door and took the steps 2 at a time, the cold metal echoing with my descent. The lobby was deserted except for a young man behind the front desk, idly scrolling on his phone. He looked up, startled, as I stumbled toward him, disheveled and breathless. I spilled out the story in fractured sentences. The notes, the messages, the feeling of someone in the room. He listened with a growing expression of bewildered skepticism, not fear. He consulted his computer screen. Sir, according to this, there are only 3 other guests checked in on the 3rd floor tonight. An elderly couple in 308 and a trucker in 315. Neither has called the desk or reported anything unusual. He offered me a new room on a different floor or an early checkout with a partial refund. My choice was instantaneous. I'm checking out. Now. But before I left, a stubborn need for validation made me ask, can you just check my room? The window, maybe? He sighed, clearly wishing to be rid of me, but fetched a master key. We rode the elevator back up in silence. The hallway felt even more oppressive now. He unlocked room 312 and pushed the door open, standing back to let me enter first. Everything was as I had left it in my panic. The lamp on, the bedclothes rumpled, my scattered belongings on the floor. It looked pathetic, not sinister. The clerk did a perfunctory walkthrough. Then he went to the window, tugged on the latch and frowned. "Ha!" he said, his tone shifting. "This lock is broken. See? The mechanism is snapped clean off. Looks recent, too." He glanced at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine unease in his eyes. That broken latch was a tangible fact, a piece of evidence that supported my impossible story. It meant entry was possible. It meant someone could have come and gone. I didn't need to hear more. I gathered my spilled clothes, shoved them into my bag, and was out of the room and back in the parking lot within 60 seconds. I drove 20 miles to the next town, found a brightly lit chain hotel, and checked in. I didn't sleep. I sat in the new, anonymous room with every light on and a chair propped under the door handle. The next morning, fueled by a need for closure, I called the first hotel. I asked if they had reviewed their security camera footage from the third-floor hallway. The manager who came on the line was polite but dismissive. "We checked the recordings for that time period, sir. There was no activity in the hallway outside your room between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. No one approached your door." He offered a bland apology for any inconvenience. But his words and the clerk's discovery didn't match. The cameras showed nothing. The window latch was broken. One of those facts had to be wrong. I've replayed it 1,000 times. The slow slides, the chilling words, the silhouette in the hall. The most plausible explanation, the one that haunts me, is that someone was coming and going not from the hall but from somewhere else. And they had been inside long before I ever arrived. My second story comes from a man named David, whose experience shifted the threat from the psychological to the violently physical. It was on a marathon drive to visit his family for Thanksgiving. Fatigue blurred the lines on the road, and around 11 p.m., he knew he had to stop. He exited the interstate in rural Virginia and pulled into the first motel he saw. A 2-story, L-shaped building with a flickering vacancy sign. The parking lot held only 4 other cars. The air was cold and still. The lobby was a small, glass-walled box. The night manager, a gaunt man in an ill-fitting polo shirt, barely grunted in acknowledgement as David filled out the paperwork. He handed over an actual metal key attached to a large plastic fob shaped like a horseshoe. "Third floor, end of the hall," he mumbled, already turning back to his small television. The interior staircase was concrete, lit by buzzing fluorescent tubes. The third-floor hallway was a canyon of gloom, with only every other sconce light working. Nearly every door had a "Do Not Disturb" sign hanging from the knob, giving the floor a closed-off, secretive feel. Room 312 was once again at the very end. David turned the key in the lock and pushed inside. The room was clean enough, but it had a disheveled quality. It wasn't dirty, but it felt lived in moments before his arrival. A desk lamp was tilted at an odd angle, as if someone had bumped it. One of the 3 drawers on a cheap dresser was pulled out about an inch. Most tellingly, the beige bedspread had a distinct, body-shaped depression near the foot of the bed, the fabric still slightly crumpled. David shrugged it off. Sloppy cleaning crew, he thought. In a hurry, he was too tired to care. He dropped his backpack onto the single armchair, flipped on the TV for background noise, and fell into a deep, immediate sleep. He awoke to a sound so subtle his conscious mind almost filtered it out. A faint, metallic snick, then a soft click. He lay still in the darkness, the room illuminated only by the silent, flickering blue light of the TV, which was now on a static-filled channel. He stared at the door. The shadow of the doorknob twisted slightly, stopped, twisted again more cautiously. His breath caught. Someone was outside, testing the handle. After a pause, a new sound. The clear, unmistakable rasp of a key being inserted into the deadbolt. The lock turned with a solid thunk. But the door didn't open. It shuddered gently once, as if a shoulder had been leaned against it, then eased back into the frame. The key turned again, retracting the bolt. Then silence. David's logic fought with his fear. *A staff member with the wrong room. They realized their mistake and left. *, it was the only reasonable answer. He lay there for an hour, listening to the absolute quiet of the hall. His nerves stretched wire-tight. Eventually, exhaustion overpowered adrenaline, and he sank back into a troubled sleep. At 2:15 a.m., a different sound pulled him to the surface. Not metal on metal, but a soft, rustling fabric. The sound of hands quietly rifling through a bag. He was awake instantly, his body frozen. He lay still, listening. The rustling continued. Slowly, he pushed himself up on his elbows. The room was dark, but the ambient light from the parking lot seeped through the thin curtains. In the corner, where he had left his backpack on the chair, a large, dark shape was hunched over. It was a man, a broad silhouette methodically going through his belongings. Panic erupted, short-circuiting his voice. "Who is that?" he finally managed, the words a dry croak. The figure went still. Then, a deep, calm voice replied from the darkness. "It's housekeeping. Sorry, I'll leave now." The absurdity of the statement, housekeeping at 2:15 a.m., was overshadowed by its chilling normalcy. The dark shape straightened up, turned, and walked calmly to the door. It opened, the shape slipped out, and the door closed with a soft, definitive click. For 3 full seconds, David didn't move. Then action returned in a flood. He scrambled out of bed, flipped on the overhead light, and ran to the door, sliding the chain lock with trembling fingers. He then went to his backpack. It had been unzipped, its contents, clothes, toiletries, a paperback book, pulled out and roughly examined before being shoved back in. Nothing was missing as far as he could tell. That somehow made it worse. This wasn't a theft. It was an intrusion, a violation for its own sake. He called the front desk. The same bored voice answered. "There is no housekeeping staff on duty at this hour, sir," the clerk stated flatly, a hint of irritation in his tone. David demanded they call the police. He packed his bag, left the room, and went down to the lobby to wait. When the police arrived, they were professional but skeptical. David insisted they review the motel's surveillance footage. Reluctantly, the night clerk brought up the digital recordings on the computer behind the desk. What they saw erased all doubt. The time-stamped video showed a large, heavy-set man in a dark hoodie, his face obscured, pacing the third-floor hallway for nearly 20 minutes. He stopped at David's door 3 separate times, trying the handle, listening. Then, on the 4th approach, he pulled a key from his pocket, unlocked the door, and entered. He was inside for 4 minutes and 17 seconds before exiting and walking calmly out of frame. The clerk paled. He must have stolen a master key. "We had an issue with that last month." David didn't wait for the rest. He got a full refund, got in his car, and drove for another 30 minutes before pulling into a well-lit truck stop parking lot, where he spent the remainder of the night fitfully dozing in his driver's seat, too afraid to enter another building. The event left a permanent scar on his sense of security. As he told me, "A hotel room is a promise of temporary sanctuary. That man didn't just steal my things, he shattered that promise completely. Now, every door, every window, every quiet hallway feels like a potential breach waiting to happen." The third narrative takes us to New Jersey, with a woman named Anya who sought solitude on a weekend hiking trip. She booked a cheap hotel near the trailhead, a squat, stucco building that had seen better decades. When she checked in early in the evening, the lobby was deserted save for a weary-looking woman at the desk. "You're on the 2nd floor, honey. Room 207. Housekeeping's already been through, so you're all set," the woman said, handing over a keycard. The statement was offered as a reassurance, a guarantee of cleanliness. Anya would later dissect those words, turning them over and over in her mind. The 2nd-floor hallway was long and narrow, with a flickering light fixture halfway down that cast stuttering shadows. Her room was standard fare, though it carried a faint, sweet, musty odor she couldn't place. It seemed clean, but a decorative pillow from the bed had been placed on the room's sole armchair, sitting at a slightly crooked angle. Anya, a meticulous person, picked it up and placed it neatly back on the bed. She ate a protein bar, watched some TV, and then took a long, hot shower to soothe her muscles. When she emerged, wiping steam from the bathroom mirror, she noticed the room temperature had dropped significantly. A chill hung in the air. She glanced at the thermostat. It was set to 72. She shrugged, assuming the ancient HVAC system was just inefficient. But as she got into bed, her eyes kept being drawn to a dark corner of the room, where a small closet door stood ajar. The darkness there seemed thicker, more substantial than elsewhere in the room. It was an irrational feeling, a primal prickle at the back of her neck, but it was persistent. She forced herself to close her eyes, pushing the unease away with thoughts of the morning's hike. She awoke not to a sound, but to a sensation, the distinct feeling of not being alone. Then she heard it, A soft, whispery shuff on the short pile carpet, coming from the direction of that dark corner. She lay perfectly still, her ears straining. And then she heard the breathing. It was slow, deep, and rhythmic, but with a slight wet catch at the end of each exhale. It was not her own. The sound was emanating from the space near the slightly open closet door. Terror, cold and absolute, glued her to the mattress. Her mind raced. Asterisk the air vent? Pipe? Asterisk but the sound was organic, living. She held her own breath, and the other breathing continued, unhurried, unaware. Finally, with a monumental effort of will, she pushed herself up on her elbows and looked directly at the closet. The breathing stopped instantly. In the silence that followed, she noticed a new detail. The closet door, which she had left open a full 6 inches, was now closed to within a mere crack. Someone or something had moved it from inside. That was the breaking point. Moving with a slow, deliberate caution she didn't feel, she slid out of the bed and began backing toward the main door, her eyes locked on the dark slit of the closet. Her hand found the doorknob behind her. She turned it, slipped into the hallway, and pulled the door shut with a soft click. The hallway was empty and silent. Her heart felt like a wild animal in her chest. She hurried down to the lobby. The front desk was empty, the chair vacant. A phone on the counter began to ring, its shrill tone echoing in the small space. No one came to answer it. After what felt like an eternity, the same clerk from before emerged from a back room, looking annoyed. Anya, trying to keep her voice steady, explained that she believed someone was in her room. The woman's expression shifted from annoyance to patronizing skepticism. "Honey, it's just you and 2 truckers on that floor. Housekeeping left hours ago. You probably had a nightmare. We get that sometimes with folks sleeping in a new place." The dismissal was like a slap. Anya, however, insisted the woman accompany her back to the room to check. Back in room 207, everything was infuriatingly normal. The closet door was now fully open, swinging gently as if they disturbed the air. The pillow was back on the bed, perfectly centered. The room was cool, but not unnaturally so. The clerk gave Anya a pointed look that said, "See? I can move you to another room if it'll make you feel better," she offered, her tone implying Anya was being a difficult child, humiliated and angry, but also deeply unsettled. Anya accepted. She was given room 214, at the opposite end of the same hall. She moved her few belongings quickly, triple-checked the locks, and tried to calm her nerves. An hour passed. The fear began to recede, replaced by a deep weariness. She finally started to drift off. Then, a new sound pierced the silence. The high-pitched, rhythmic squeak of wheels. It was unmistakable, a housekeeping cart, its metal frame protesting as it was pushed slowly down the carpeted hallway. Anya's eyes flew open. The clerk had said no housekeeping was on duty. The squeaking grew louder, then stopped abruptly. Right outside her new door. She held her breath. And then she heard it again. The same slow, wet, labored breathing, right against the thin wood of the door. It went on for a full minute, a sound of pure proximity. Then came a soft thump, not a knock with knuckles, but the sound of something flat. A palm, perhaps, being pressed firmly against the door panel. The feeling, not an announcement. After another agonizing pause, the squeaking resumed, the cart rolling away, its sound fading down the hall. Anya didn't sleep another wink. To first light, she packed and went to check out. A different person was at the desk now, a middle-aged man with a kind face. She relayed the events of the night, her voice trembling despite her efforts. As she mentioned the housekeeping cart, the man's expression changed. He looked uneasy, glancing around as if to ensure they were alone. He lowered his voice. "Ma'am, we haven't had a night housekeeper on staff for over a week. The woman who worked that shift just stopped showing up. No call, nothing. Management's been trying to cover the shifts themselves." The implications settled over Anya like a cold fog. The daytime clerk's lie about housekeeping being done, the breathing in the first room, the moving closet door, the cart in the night, the missing housekeeper still had her keys. Anya left without another word, the pieces clicking into a horrifying picture. Someone had been living in that hotel, moving through the rooms, and she had likely been sleeping just feet away from them. Our final story offers a perspective from within the industry itself, from a former hotel maintenance worker named Leo. His job was a mix of handyman and odd jobber, fixing leaky faucets, unclogging toilets, restocking the pool area. One quiet Wednesday night in the summer of 2023, he was working alongside a new front desk agent named Brianna. The hotel was dead, with no check-ins expected. Part of Leo's closing duties was to ensure the indoor pool area was stocked with fresh towels. He used his master key, a device that granted access to every non-guest room in the building, to unlock the pool door. The room was humid, the air thick with the smell of chlorine. The water in the pool was still, lit by underwater lights that cast wavering blue patterns on the ceiling. Leo went into the attached storage closet, a small, tiled room filled with stacks of towels, cleaning chemicals, and pool equipment. He was bending down to grab a stack from a low shelf when a tremendous, echoing SPLOSH shattered the silence. He jumped, dropping the towels. Heart racing, he rushed back out to the pool deck. There, floating serenely in the center of the otherwise empty pool, was one of the bright red life rings that usually hung on the wall. There was no one in the water, no one on the deck. The door to the hallway was still securely closed. It was as if the ring had simply decided to go for a swim. A deep, irrational chill went through him. He fished the ring out with the long pole, returned it to its hook, finished his task quickly, and left, locking the door firmly behind him. He didn't mention it to Brianna, not wanting to seem strange to the new hire. Later, a maintenance slip came through for an unoccupied room on the third floor, 324. The toilet wouldn't flush. Brianna confirmed the guests weren't arriving until Friday, so Leo headed up with his tools. The room was dark and still. He went straight into the bathroom, lifted the toilet lid, and began his work. As he was adjusting the flapper valve, a sudden, intense cold washed over him. It was so abrupt it made him gasp. The hairs on his arms and the back of his neck stood straight up. He stopped working, listening. The cold wasn't coming from the vents. It was ambient, filling the space like water. It was also impossible. It was a hot, muggy July night. Just as suddenly as it came, the cold vanished, the room snapping back to its previous warmth. Leo checked the wall thermostat, 68 degrees. It hadn't changed. Shaken, he hurried to finish the repair. The toilet gurgled, then flushed properly. As the tank began to refill with a rushing sound, a loud, solid thump echoed from the bedroom. Leo froze. The sound was heavy, like a piece of furniture being dropped. The cold feeling crept back at the edges of his awareness. Cautiously, he stepped out of the bathroom. The bedroom was dim, lit only by the light spilling from the bathroom. His eyes went first to the nightstand. The room's telephone was off the hook, its cord dangling toward the floor, the handset swinging slightly. But that's not what held his gaze. Past the beds, in the far corner of the room where the shadows were deepest, stood a figure. It was tall, easily over 6 feet, and it was utterly black. Not dressed in black, but black in a way that absorbed the faint light. A silhouette with no discernible features. No face, no clothing details, no texture. It was a human-shaped void. It stood perfectly motionless. Leo's breath caught. His brain tried and failed to process the information. He stared, and the figure stared back from its faceless darkness. Then, without warning, it moved. Not a step, but a subtle shift in its posture. A tilt of that blank head. That was enough. Every survival instinct screamed. Leo bolted. He wrenched the main door open, fled into the hall, and didn't stop until he was back at his car in the employee lot. He called Brianna, said he was feeling sick and leaving early, and drove home in a daze. He never reported what he saw. How could he? But in his mind, the events connected. The self-propelled life ring, the impossible cold snap, the shadow figure in the empty room. They were part of the same unexplained phenomenon. He told me, "I worked there for 2 years. I know every creak and groan of that building. What I saw in room 324 wasn't a person. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was a presence. And the worst part is, I know it's probably still there. For stories. For different doors that opened onto moments of profound dread. From handwritten terror to physical intrusion. From a hidden watcher to something that defies explanation. Each one reveals how the familiar space of a hotel can become a stage for our deepest fears. They remind us that walls are thin, locks can be bypassed, and the promise of safety is sometimes just that. A promise easily broken. If these accounts have resonated with you, made you glance at your own door, or simply given you that satisfying chill, please show some support. A like on this video makes a tremendous difference for this channel, Winds of Thought. It tells us these are the kinds of true, personal stories you want to hear more of. Your engagement fuels our search for the next compelling narrative. Thank you for listening. Wherever you are, stay curious and perhaps stay aware of what might be on the other side of the door.